So let's talk about marriage and parenting and child rearing. Before we can get into it in a lot of depth, it's important to understand that while pairing up with people is universal, the ways we do that is culturally specific. So the ways we select our mates, whether it's through monogamy or polygamy, is not a universal thing across all cultures. And that leads to marriage. Marriage is a socially defined and recognized union of individuals. In marriage, it's not all about you just recognizing each other as a couple, but it's also about the broader culture recognizing you as a couple. And when we talk about marriage, the basis for marriage is not the same in every culture. So in many Western cultures, the basis for marriage is romantic love. And in many Eastern cultures, the basis for marriage is what we're going to call pragmatic love. So romantic love involves four major characteristics. So the first characteristic of romantic love is idealization of your loved one. If you are in a romantic love relationship, you tend to see the world through rose-colored glasses. And your partner, you don't notice that they don't brush their teeth enough, or they have smelly farts, or they don't clean up their mess. In romantic love, you see the best thing in a person. Just think about that when you have a friend who introduces you to their new mate and they tell you how wonderful they are, and then you meet them and you're like, oh. And so when we think about romantic love, remember that when you are in a romantic love relationship, you often idealize your partner. The next characteristic is this idea of a soulmate, this one and only person that's out there for you. And we're all out there looking for this perfect person. Of course, the irony of that is that we are not perfect ourselves, right? And that causes us quite a few problems in romantic love cultures. Another characteristic of romantic love is this idea of love at first sight. I saw him across the room. I knew that he was the one for me, The earth stopped and stood still in that moment. That's a very romantic way of thinking about things. Maybe that's not love. Maybe that's lust. I don't know. I'm just saying. And then the last characteristic of romantic love is that it is very emotional. It's kind of like a roller coaster. When it's up, it's way up, and when it's down, it's womp, 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 womp. People who are in romantic love relationships are very much on a roller coaster. They have a bad day with their partner, it ruins their whole day. They have a good day, I'm walking on sunshine, and they're thrilled. And so I think it's important for us to understand that romantic love by its nature is very emotional and often volatile. And that contrasts with pragmatic love. So in pragmatic love, if romantic love, you're looking for this emotional connection with this one special person that is, a perfect person for you. Pragmatic love is when you're thinking about the feasibility of the relationship. Feasible meaning, is it going to work? Do we have things in common with each other? Do we share values? Do we share backgrounds? Do we share a common goal in raising our family? So in Eastern cultures, particularly cultures that have had a tradition of arranged marriage, pragmatic love is much more important than romantic love. And the idea is that, love is not something that you start with in a pragmatic love culture. Love is something that you build through your connection over time with each other. I would argue that even though romantic love is a primary basis of marriage in this culture, as you get older, you get more experience, you do have to think, practically, about whether or not your relationship's going to work. I mean, if you're a spender and she's a saver, or if she's a, outgoing person who wants to party all the time and you want to sit around home, then you might have some problems. So that's another thing to think about when we talk about love and mate selection and pragmatic versus romantic intentions in marriage. The next thing is rules of mate selection. Mate selection tends to follow two different rules. One set of rules are rules of exogamy. Exo means exit, and gamy is marriage. So in exogamy, you're expected to marry outside of your group. We long had a tradition of exogamy with regard to gender. Of course, that's changing more recently. We have exogamy norms that say you can't marry your mama or your daddy or your brother or your sister. We also have endogamy norms. Endo is within and gamy is marriage. So in endogamy, you are marrying someone who is similar to you. In the United States, most marriages are endogamous, particularly in terms of things like race, religion, class, age, to some extent ethnicity. So a lot of us are going to end up marrying someone who is like us. When you look at the number of interracial marriages, it's pretty low. Depending on whether or not you count Latinos as a race, about 5 to 10% of marriages overall are interracial marriages. Recent marriages is a little higher, 15 to 17%. But if you look at the overall number of marriages in the U.S., there are not a lot of them that are people of different races. Same is true with class. You know, you don't very often see the Cinderella story in real life, the prince marrying, the maid or whatever. That's not very common. Most people marry someone from a similar class background. They marry someone from a similar religious background. They tend to marry someone who's the same age. You're probably not going to see, people marrying someone the age of their parents. That's fairly uncommon. So the dominant norm in this culture, frankly, is endogamy. We do have a few exogamy norms, but for the most part, most of us are going to marry someone like us. So when we hear people say opposites attract, the truth is like attracts like more often than opposites attract. Another term that you will see that's kind of similar is homogamy. Homo is same and gamy is marriage. And homogamy, you're not just looking at the group membership that you're part of, but you're also looking for someone who maybe shares your values, shares your experiences. Maybe you're a morning person and you don't want a night person who stays up all night. Maybe you're an outgoing person and you want another outgoing person. So it's your personality traits and your values. It could also mean your group membership. But again, homo is same and gamy is marriage. Homogamy is a very broad term. Endogamy and exogamy are just talking about whether or not someone is in the same social group as you, whether it's things like class, race, religion, gender, age, ethnicity, and so forth. All right. The last section of this is about fertility. Fertility refers to having children. And the overall fertility rate in a culture is generally measured. Total fertility is the number of kids we would expect a woman to have in her lifetime. Fertility rate in a given year is out of every 1,000 women ages 15 to 44 or 45. I got to remember that exactly. We expect overall, if the population were to stay stable, the replacement level for fertility, the amount of babies that women would have to have in order to maintain the population is 2.1 children per woman in her lifetime. It's a little over 2 because children may die and may not live to adulthood. So if we want our population to be stable, ignoring deaths and migration and people moving, what we want is our society to be at this replacement level of 2.1. So let's talk about the factors that influence how many children women have. One is your age at which you get married. The older you get married, as your age of marriage goes up, the number of children you have goes down. That kind of makes sense. If you marry young, you're going to have a lot more children. Whether or not you breastfeed, that can affect your fertility rate. Breastfeeding biologically lowers your fertility. When you're breastfeeding and nursing a baby, you release hormones that suppress ovulation for a period of time, so that lowers fertility. The infant mortality rate can affect fertility. In cultures with high infant mortality rates, women tend to have more kids. The idea is if you have 6 or 7 kids, you expect that 4 or 5 of them may live to adulthood. But in cultures with low infant mortality, you're not going to see people having as many children because you can't afford to take care of all 7 children if they live. Gender preferences can shape fertility. If your gender preferences are met, then you tend to stop having children. If you want a boy and a girl and you have a boy and a girl, you're going to stop. But if you want a boy and you have a girl, you might try to have a 3rd child. So I can't put an up or down arrow on that, but your gender preferences can impact, getting your preferences met can impact how many kids that you have. The perception of cost and benefits. If children are expensive, which we're seeing in most Western countries nowadays, the number of children that people have goes down. If children are viewed as an economic asset and they can help you on the farm or help you raise your economic status in the culture, then they're going to have more children. In late stage capitalism, children are generally considered a social and economic cost that people have. Contraception is birth control. Birth control should lower your fertility rate if you use it and use it effectively. Your income can affect your fertility. In this culture, higher income women are actually having fewer kids than lower income women. Some of that is good quality access to birth control and reproductive health care. That allows wealthier women to lower their fertility. Some of it is that a lot of wealthier women are professional women themselves, and that leads to education. And when it comes to education, everywhere in the world, the more educated a woman is, the fewer kids that she will have. So higher education means lower fertility. Higher income also means lower fertility, but income and education are very strongly related in modern American culture. Rural people tend to have more children than urban people. They often don't have as high a quality access to health care as urban people do. In urban areas, children are more expensive. Where would you put your 10 kids in a city apartment? Not going to happen. The last thing on there is government policies, and there are two types of government policies. Pro-natalist policies encourage people to have babies, and anti-natalist policies discourage them from having babies. So the government can influence how many babies people have. Maybe if you have more children, they give you a tax break, or if you have more children like they used to do in China, they had a one-child policy. If you had more than one child, your child couldn't get social benefits. Things like education and healthcare were things that you would have to pay for, but if you had one child, they were free. So that would be an anti-natalist policy. A pro-natalist policy is going to try to get you to have more children, and you should think about the difference between those two things. So remember, the basis for marriage is different in different cultures, romantic versus pragmatic love, and the rules of mate selection are very important for us to understand. And also, this video covers the factors that affect the number of children that a woman will have.